Eric, it's been 6 months. We've released 25, when this video's out, probably 26, 27 videos. What is the state of Mind the Growth podcast?
We're in shambles. That'll be the thumbnail. Try to get people to click. We're hitting a little bit of a stride, I think. We should talk about how we already talked about early on how it began, but maybe a little recap and what the plan was, what it looks like now. So I guess starting off, when we first talked, we talked about what we thought could be a cool format, which was kind of all over the place, but had a general vibe of business growth and, finances in a sense that has to do with investing, crypto, watch collecting, cars, that sort of thing, with a little wine mixed in. But
we still haven't drinking any wine on the podcast, so that's we will be soon, though. We will be soon.
We got one in the docket, so hopefully soon. But I think when we started off, at least from my point of view, the plan was more so to just do something creative in this space and meet interesting people and just try it out, because I'm an avid listener of podcasts and watcher of YouTube channels. So something that I heard a while back that resonated with me is, if you are consuming a lot of content, you should try your best, if you have any interest in the space, to produce more content than you consume at some point. And I thought that was an interesting way to look at things, because it's easy to fall into the rabbit hole of YouTube or Spotify or whatever it may be, and just find yourself consuming things all the time. Even with reading, you can consume as many self-help books as you want, but until you start practicing what those are trying to preach, it's not, knowledge only gets you so far. It's actually the practice of doing something. So for me, at least, I'll speak for myself, that was the prime intention, is to just try it out, get our feet wet. And if it turns to be a financial win or we start making money off of it, great. But at minimum, it would be a good practice and a good experience to at least put some of our thoughts and ideas and things out in the world. So what was your original point of view when you were brainstorming this for yourself?
So I guess I'll explain it how, and then I think we should also kind of position this of, how we are doing the podcast, kind of our certain roles that we play. That way people can kind of maybe get a little bit of a further understanding of what truly goes into making something like this.
Who does all the work around here?
Yeah, exactly. So one of my primary roles is scheduling and coordinating. And when I pitch the podcast to individuals, and what we've definitely found through this process is partnering with some larger channels is a little bit more challenging, just due to the fact that there's more of an incentive for us than there is for them to do kind of a collaboration or deal with us. So it's something that we're still kind of. I know. We might have one in the books here coming up soon, but you guys will have to stay tuned for that. But how I usually pitch it to people is, Eric and I feel that we have a unique network that kind of sprawls and spans through a variety of different sectors, verticals, however you want to describe that. But ultimately, when I'm talking to somebody about coming on the podcast, I say, let's say Matt, for example. Matt, I think you should come on the podcast. Why is that? The goal of the podcast is, if somebody asks me, what does Matt do? How has Matt had success? Who is he as a person? I would like to bring that out and kind of convey that and show that, what all these different factors and components about Matt, of who he is, why he is that way, what he or she has built, etc. And that's really the pitch for the podcast. Obviously, the emphasis on really kind of either the company that they built or the success that they've had, but ultimately sharing their story and just having good conversations with good people. So I think that we've we've accomplished that in a lot of senses. So I think from that standpoint, that's how I look at it. That's how I describe it. And, it's exciting to see us, 25 episodes in, and we've had some great conversations with some great people.
Yeah, agreed. And it's been a definite learning experience. What my role's been from the get-go is more producing the show. And what that looks like was not what I was expecting, but it wound up being an exciting process. So from the get-go, we had always wanted to do both audio and video. A lot of podcasts obviously start as audio only because that's technically what a podcast is. But most of the major ones or popular ones have grown into a video platform as well, whether through YouTube or now through Spotify, because you can host video, which we are. But that made for some interesting hoops to jump through, different dynamics. And right at the get-go, I really have had no experience producing a video show or a podcast. So it was a lot of learning quickly up front. And I will say, for those who are interested in starting off, we probably started in the exact opposite way of what I would recommend somebody to start. Usually, in order to grow a media brand or something to that effect, your best bet is to start with a very narrow niche and grow from there, because you can plug into a dedicated audience. You can talk about the same things, developments of those things, whether, just using an example of one of the topics we like, wine. There's not a lot of wine YouTube channels. There are some that are big, but if we focus primarily on that and some of the new vintages that are coming out, the points systems that people rely on, things of that nature, I think we could probably grow much quicker. And maybe that's something we try at some point. But I think our grand vision from the get-go was to have a broad spectrum of things that we're interested in, and then do the opposite and, break those out into their own individual types of brands over time, whether it's still us doing the interviews or maybe others along the way. But for somebody starting out, I mean, it would be so much easier to just start with audio, focus on a niche, and hammer that down. But we like what we like, and I think the goal at the end of the day was for it to be fun and talk to people that are interesting in different spaces. So I think we accomplished that. But some of the interesting things, and we just dealt with this earlier today on an interview we did, doing these episodes virtually makes for some interesting dynamics, like when we have a storm the night before and my internet's in and out. It makes it hard to have a conversation when some other guests can't hear me, or when we're going to somebody's location, which I think you put in the notes here. We always love being on location and doing in-person interviews because it makes for just a better conversation. You're in person, you see the space of whoever you're, interviewing usually. But the difficulty is we don't usually go and scope out those spaces, which we probably should do. And, setting up the equipment is, it takes time, and sometimes things work, sometimes things don't. Sometimes the Cox guy or the air conditioner guy will walk through while you're actually interviewing somebody. So yeah, those things are interesting. But one thing that we're going to try for the next in-person interview, which I learned from Tim Ferriss, was previously we had mics like this, and they were just on desk stands. And part of the difficulty with something like this is these are more what you would call professional grade microphones. And in order to get the best sound out of them, you have to be pretty close here. If you go further away, you can't hear as well. So our guests, I've noticed, they're more focused on the conversation, and rightfully so. So sometimes they're, using their hands to talk, and they're moving one way or another, and the microphone feed's going in and out. So what we're going to try to do is use one of those like stage mics where you actually have to hold it. And Tim Ferriss, which I've listened to forever, he swears by this technique because he said when people are holding a microphone, they are incentivized to literally hold it to their mouth because it's just what you do with a stage microphone. And they can take it with them. They can go, wherever they want with it. And you have the XLR cables, that are long enough where there's slack and you can just use it as you will. So I think that's going to be an interesting shift. And I think we'll get some more high quality audio out of that. But it's some of those things that I've been learning and we've been learning as we go. And similarly with cameras, you just set up a studio at your new place, which in my view looks much better than it did at your office. Maybe it's the lighting, maybe it's the internet connection, who the hell knows.
Well, as the clouds are going by too, I've noticed myself getting lighter and darker in front of my big glass windows over here.
Yeah. But I think overall we are, like I said at the beginning, hitting a bit of a stride and it's becoming easier, but the scheduling's still tricky. So you have your work cut out for you.
Absolutely. Well, and then I guess kind of the takeaway of that, or the way I see the takeaway of that, is there's so many different variables that go into this, and virtually as well too. So anybody who's starting off, you talk about the proximity to and from the microphone, you talk about the gear. There's a lot of factors when you have guests on who don't have, and this is why we prefer doing them in person over virtual, is when you have a guest on, and we use a service called Riverside. For the most part, Riverside's been great. There's been a few hiccups that we've had with it. However, you don't have control over the Wi-Fi for yourself or the individual. And like you said, if there was a storm before, how's the internet connection?
Right.
Audio. What type of audio from headphones and a microphone standpoint are the individuals who you're interviewing? What are they using? Chances are they're not doing too many podcasts, so their equipment's not going to be as ideal. And then the background as well too. We've had some great people on who, if they were in a little bit of a different setting, I asked myself, would those have come out a little bit better? If you're recording yourself on a laptop computer, kind of at an angle, or wherever your office might be situated, or if you're on the go, etc. How do we get that quality of that podcast to be as good as possible? So, for those of you who are listening, if you're thinking about starting your own podcast, if you can pull off having a dedicated set, that'd probably be the most ideal situation. Or if you go on site, make sure you've got a very clear idea as to what the lighting's going to be, what the angles need to be, what the environment in that space is going to be.
Yeah, I've been thinking about how we streamline this even more, because for instance, one of my jobs with producing the show is to make sure it gets edited correctly with video and audio. So I was doing some of them myself at first, and I'm definitely not a professional editor, so it was taking me forever. I could get it done, but not to the quality that I wanted. So I went on Upwork to just find different freelance editors who can do it for me. And I've gone through a few. There was a guy in Canada I used for a little while who was decent and he could get the job done, but he wasn't as reliable from a timing perspective. And it just wasn't the quality that I was hoping for. So then the way I started to find them is I would hire 3 at a time. And I would give them 1 episode to edit, and I would just pick the one that I liked their edit best. So I did that again after we worked with the guy in Canada for a while, and found a guy who allegedly is in Ukraine. I don't know if he's still there, but apparently a lot of Ukrainians are on Upwork and do a lot of good freelance work, whether it's editing, coding, whatever it may be. So he's been pretty good so far. Still sometimes where the edit is delayed, and that's not ideal. But what I've been thinking about, and my wife Rana, she knows a few people at the ASU Film School. I'm wondering if we could find somebody that could be somewhat of like an intern who's in the film school, whether we pay him similarly to the people on Upwork or how we pay them. I don't know. I haven't gone that far, but we really would do better if we had like a dedicated producer. I mean, we're not really at that point in our growth to qualify for one. We're not making money yet, but
we're minding our growth.
Yeah. But just for the sake of ease and quality, I think that would be a better option where they could be on the Riverside feed with us as a producer, and they can, help manage those troubleshooting issues, or in person. One of the troubles that I've had is we use something called a Rodecaster Pro. It's the mixer. And we don't use headphones when we record the podcast, which we probably should, but you can't really hear the feed. So if someone's mic isn't as loud as somebody else's, it's hard to, in real time, make sure the sound is, set up properly. So I've been thinking that would be a good direction to go, is to find somebody who can actually be either virtually with us or in person with us, who's local, that can maybe cut their teeth a bit trying to edit and manage that end of things. So that's one thought I've had. What other thoughts do you have that you think we can push forward in that type of direction?
I guess maybe
do you think, I mean, ideally these would be more in person, but I've found it's a lot easier for everyone to schedule virtually because you just hop on your computer and everyone's on their computer all day long. So do you think longer term we should try and push towards that to do more in person? Or do you think just bite the bullet and still do virtual because it's easier to schedule?
I think in an ideal world, we would be able to do all of them in person. I think there's going to be a lot of constraints to that. But it really just depends on the traction that the podcast gets. If we see it continuing to gain traction, then ultimately that could be an option. I would love for them all to be in person. It would probably be ideal to have our own set, our own location, but I think that the videos and the episodes turn out so much better when we are on set. And I think it also helps that person tell their story a little bit more. So yeah, that's kind of, I guess that would be my takeaway or my thoughts on it.
Yeah. And what are your thoughts on the types of people we are bringing on? Do you think it would be better to start having more of a focus in one direction or continue how we've been?
So on my notes here, I have stay narrow. So anybody who's thinking about creating a podcast, I know Eric hit on this with wine earlier, stay narrow as you can possibly be. Obviously, that's not what we've done, and our goal is to talk to a lot of different people with different backgrounds. But I think what we've done, all the people that we've met with have great, unique individual stories. And I think what part of the conversations that we've had about some of the guests is, if you're an early startup founder, you're going to have to be a little bit more reserved and secretive, if you will, on kind of what you're building and how you're going about doing it versus, somebody who's in a little bit more of an established company. So I think that being able to give our listeners a little bit more detail on things might give them a little bit more of a positive, not really positive, but just more of a takeaway for either that sector or that company or the individual in their story. So what I'm really looking forward to is some of these earlier podcasts that we've done with some of these early startup founders, is revisiting a conversation with them in a year or 2 years from now to kind of give an update to see what they can share a little bit more with the public versus what they had to reserve in the past. So a little bit of a sporadic answer for you, but that's...
Yeah. I was going to say what I'd like more on the technology front. I noticed recently, and I sent this to you in our Slack channel, that YouTube is putting more of a focus on podcasts. And I think they have their own dedicated section now for podcasts. My hope is that they'll come out with some sort of Riverside competitor or something that'll make this a lot easier to just record and post simultaneously.
They've already kind of done that with the shorts. Yeah, with the live shorts. and shorts. Yeah, so hopefully they transition that into more of the kind of the longer content as well.
Yeah,
longer format.
There's got to be somebody that comes up with a better solution, and hopefully Riverside comes out with more updates and better options. But I haven't found a really good one quite yet.
So I think my goal with this video was kind of a two-prong. One of them being the state of the podcast and kind of giving some people a little bit more context into how we built it, why we did, what we've learned through the process. But I think something that would be interesting is outlining one of your biggest pain points and then maybe your biggest takeaway that you've had through the first 25, 26, 27 videos?
Yeah, I guess the biggest pain point so far has been twofold. I would say from my perspective is keeping up with the editor and, producing a quality end product. That's been a lot more work than I expected, for better or for worse. But I think that's still my biggest pain point, because that's what I do for the podcast. And that's partly why I was mentioning before, I'm ruminating on trying to find somebody more local that I can have regular conversations with, and maybe would be a better solution for some of that, where I can trust just giving raw files to them and having them take care of it. So that's been the biggest pain point, I would say, for me. The biggest learning so far is that it's a lot harder to build an audience than some people make it seem. And I still don't really have a clear idea. And it's weird, because I know cognitively how to build one, but it's not quite matching what I want to do. So I have that kind of weird dynamic in my head, and we've touched on that earlier in this episode, that I like having these broad conversations because I have a ton of different wide-ranging interests, but I know for a fact that staying narrow, staying within a niche, and just kind of embedding yourself in that type of arena, whatever it is, it can be a lot easier to grow an audience. I haven't done it, so I can't guarantee that, but I think it's hard either way. So that's been the biggest learning that I've had so far. How about you? Both same questions.
Yeah, I think the biggest pain point is it's scheduling, which it's pretty obvious for kind of my role in this. Whether it's my schedule, your schedule, and then the guest schedule is obviously a little bit more challenging as well too. We still both work full time. You've got a huge role in your company. I've got my company that I run, so we don't have copious amounts of time to kind of spend wherever. I mean, and you've got a family and a kid, so you're a lot busier than I am. So
yeah.
Pain point is definitely keeping the schedule full, making sure that we can get as many guests on as we can. And the biggest takeaway, I think I probably is probably very similar to yours. My gut was telling me that if we put out as much content as possible, that we would be able to gain traction. And it hasn't happened as quickly as I thought it would. And ironically enough, so when we first started the channel, our goal was to put out an interview every single week. So if you look at the first 3 videos I think we put out, it was interview. And Eric and I had a conversation as we had finished up with one of the interviews. And we said, this is just not going to be feasible for us to continue at this pace. So what you'll notice now is we do a format where every other week is when we release an interview, and in between the interviews is a conversation with Eric and I. And something that is kind of been, I don't want to say challenging, but us coming up with creative topics that are going to be where we think people will engage in and enjoy. And that we could probably go a little bit more narrow, but my biggest fear with being too narrow is redundancy and not putting out content that we think we're going to enjoy and other people are going to enjoy. But then you go back to being a little bit wider, not narrow. So that's kind of my takeaway.
It's a bit of a conundrum, but we'll see. Maybe 6 months from now, we'll have our second State of the Union, and we'll have a better idea of how to do this right. But I think everyone that I've listened to or talked to that's built a big audience has basically said the same thing, that it took a year, 2, 3, 4, to actually get any traction. And then once that train started moving, it picked up steam pretty quickly. And then you just have compounding of people finding you and subscribers subscribing in. So hopefully that's the case. We want to continue to create a snowball effect and just have people refer their friends over. So we got to get more than our moms and dads and brothers and sisters to start referring people, and maybe some more bitter comments on our YouTube channel will do us some good. So keep those coming, whoever you are.
Yeah, if you haven't already, if you're working on a podcast, if you have an idea of a podcast, if you want to give us feedback on what we do well, what we don't do well, leave us a comment below. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, and cheers to the first half of the year.
Yeah. Cheers. Thanks, guys.